Hi, and welcome to the Good Health Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Good, a registered nutritional therapy practitioner and functional medicine practitioner. Join me as we explore thyroid, brain, and fatigue conditions with positivity. From Hashimoto's to multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue to adrenal dysfunction, I've got you covered. With expert advice and tips to help you take action now and inspiring real patient stories from successful individuals who refuse to let their health hold them back. Start your journey to good health today. And don't forget to come and join the conversation on Instagram at good_health. That's GOODE. Or visit my website at nicolegoodhealth.com to find out more. Welcome to today's episode of the Good Health Podcast. Today I've invited Louise Sellar onto the podcast. She's the Director of Communications and Development for the Thyroid Trust charity. Louise is a very proud mother of 2 children, and she volunteers at her children's local athletics club. She's been in UK construction for over 17 years. She's a lover of the great outdoors, enjoys the activities of hiking, paddleboarding, and wild water swimming. Louise found out about the Thyroid Trust in 2020 following a diagnosis of Graves' disease. The following year, she received radioactive iodine treatment, and as a result of this experience, she's passionate about raising awareness and assisting in the education of and supporting other thyroid patients and their families through diagnosis and beyond. Louise started with the Trust in December 2022, and I am thrilled to have her on the podcast today. Let's jump straight into today's episode. Hi, Louise. Welcome to the Good Health Podcast. It's great to have you on.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you very much for having me.
So let's just start. So we're obviously talking about the Thyroid Trust charity today, but just tell us a little bit about yourself first. How did you sort of get involved in this line of work? How did you get involved with the charity? What's your sort of background?
Yeah, well, it's far removed from what I do in a day job, because I actually work in the construction sector as my normal job. But I got involved with the Thyroid Trust. I was diagnosed myself with autoimmune Graves' disease in 2020 during lockdown, which was obviously a pretty scary time because everything on the news was like, don't go to your doctor, and there was all this scary stuff. So it took me a while to get diagnosed. But once I was diagnosed, obviously it was quite an isolating time anyway, because you weren't allowed to see anybody. So I just started looking for information online just about my condition, because I had never heard of anything to do with, I didn't even know what the thyroid was when I was diagnosed. I remember being like, well, what is it and where is it? And I think, like most people when they're first diagnosed with anything, you're just desperate for knowledge and information and, understanding of what treatment options were available, what were all the symptoms, and, did I have them all, and was there anything else to come, and all this sort of stuff. So I just started looking around for information and came across the charity then in terms of, online, just looking for that support really of information. And when I saw on social media, because I was already following the Thyroid Trust, that there was an opportunity to get involved, I just jumped at the chance, because I knew how important and impactful it had been for me personally. And so to be able to be involved in the community and help others was just something I just felt completely drawn to do, and was like, yes. And thankfully they felt the same way. So I actually only joined the charity in December of 2022. So it's still all relatively new to me, working in the third sector and the charity sector, but I absolutely love it. And it's a very supportive, nice place to be.
Yeah, it must have been very difficult getting diagnosed. I mean, it's bad enough for people at the best of times, but through, like you said, through COVID and lockdowns and all of that, it must have been quite daunting going through that at that time.
Yeah, it was very scary. Like I say, I think everybody was on a sort of heightened sense of anxiety generally at that stage. And like I say, at the time I went to A&E because I had this very elevated heart rate, and I felt really, really just not well. I was told at the time, where they did no blood tests or anything like that, they checked my heart, that they thought it was down to anxiety, because there was nothing that they could find actually wrong with my heart. It was only when I did a private at-home finger prick blood test, because access to your GP surgery and everything at that stage was still done over the phone. it was only when I started shaking that I thought, this really isn't right. And in my mind, the only thing that medically I'd associated previous with shaking was Parkinson's disease. So I was thinking, oh, maybe it's that. So I did this finger prick blood test, and I got a response pretty quickly once I sent that off, saying you need to see somebody. And credit to my GP at that stage, as soon as I sent them the results that I'd had through this company, they acted on it straight away. And I was in having a blood test through the GPs, and they started me on medication. But just trying to get access to a consultant was incredibly difficult. I was very fortunate I had private healthcare through employment at that time. And even that was really, really difficult. And all of it was done via Zoom. So it was just, I mean, it's scary for anybody when you're sort of told information, and especially because it was quite limited, like I say, at diagnosis. And it was even more worrying when then everything was sort of being done over online platforms, which we're all really used to now.
Yeah.
I are talking on a platform, and everybody does it with work now, but at the time we were all still in very much that phase of getting used to this sort of new way of life.
And it was, like you said, it was a new way of life. So everything was changing, which was anxiety inducing for a lot of people anyway. But then to go through a health thing at the same time is, which is stressful in itself. I love the stories when people come on where they've used their story to then want to sort of give back and help others in some way. People have different ways of doing it, and I love that. And it's amazing how many of these conversations I've had actually on the podcast. Some of them haven't come out yet. I've recorded them, but they've not come out yet. But had these conversations where people have had this diagnosis, had something, and then they've ended up finding a way of actually getting involved and helping others. And I just think that's lovely. I think I always say with the podcast, what I want to do is put a positive spin on these chronic conditions that when you Google them, don't have a lot of positivity around them. And that's a real issue,
never Dr. Google as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's the first thing I did. As soon as someone said, oh, it's Graves' disease, I put it in, and I was just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And it was really odd. And when I'd been typing in my symptoms, because we all do it, let's be honest.
Yeah.
When I'd been poorly and typing in my symptoms, it kept coming up with hypothyroidism. But the one thing and I think this is one of the reasons that I never sort of pushed it, was because I didn't really know anything about it. And the other was the fact that it talked a lot on the websites about there being family links and genetic links.
Yeah.
Nobody in my immediate family has a thyroid problem. So for me, I was thinking, well, I don't know, there's nobody that's got that, so it can't be that. But obviously, the more I've been involved and the more I've learned, I realized that yes, obviously, there is a stronger link to autoimmune conditions being within families, and particularly with thyroid disease. But that's not the only. There are other people that are affected that don't have these other factors. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we always say the genes load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. So you've got to have the genetics, that kind of, you've got to have some genetics in you to be able to develop the autoimmune diseases. And this is not specific to thyroid, this is for, sort of any of them, but it's the environment that actually triggers those things off and sets them at play and starts that sort of autoimmune journey in people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, genetics usually is a relatively small part of that. There's, environment usually plays a much bigger part.
Well, I always jokingly blame homeschooling. That's what triggered the stress of trying to do that and work at the same time, whilst we were in that real pressure cooker situation of COVID. I always joke that was what triggered mine. But in reality, there's probably some truth behind it, that it was a very
stressful time. Yeah.
Intense time. So yeah.
So you got this diagnosis, you went kind of through that journey yourself, that's how you found the charity. So tell us a little bit about the charity. Who's involved in the charity? Who sort of works in it? Are they working? Do you have sort of permanent employees? Is there volunteers? What's the sort of makeup of the charity?
So the Thyroid Trust is still relatively small. It was actually set up by a group of thyroid patients in 2010. It didn't actually become a registered charity until May 2019. Some of the original founders are still involved as trustees in the charity, but otherwise it's predominantly run by the board of trustees, with myself and our operations manager, Lee, who work very sort of part-time for the charity, because like I say, we're still relatively small, and the rest is volunteers. We have an amazing group of volunteers that do all sorts of things for the charity, which I found really interesting, because my kind of perception of volunteering before I came in was that, you know, you physically have to go somewhere and do something. And whilst we do have volunteers that come along and help us at our peer support face-to-face meetings by making cups of tea and things like that, a lot of them do behind the scenes things such as editing our videos of events that we record online, or sharing stuff on social media for us, or hosting peer support groups online and things like that. So there's lots and lots of ways that people can get involved with working for the charity, and we're still very reliant on them, and we're very, very grateful for those people that step up and get involved.
And do a lot of those people have thyroid conditions themselves? Is that what you find? Most of them have been on the journey themselves?
Yeah, the majority of our trustees and volunteers are thyroid patients, or people that have been impacted by thyroid disorders in some way, whether that be, you know, a loved one, a family member, a friend, and seen firsthand how debilitating for some people and some of the symptoms can be, and the fact that for a large number of thyroid patients, the majority of them, it's a lifelong chronic condition. So they've seen the ups and downs and want to help, or like we discussed before, that giving back to the community. And it is a lovely, lovely, caring, supportive community, which is the one thing that I found personally in my own journey, and have discovered even more so in the role that I'm in now.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that, actually. What the giving back part, so the working for the charity, how do you feel that obviously that's helping other people, which is great, but do you feel that has helped you as well?
Oh, 100%. It actually feels sometimes, it's very cathartic. Absolutely. Being able to just listen and be involved. And even if you just help that one person, it's such an amazing feeling, having known, I mean, I had one lady that I met through my own journey, who I've mentioned on a blog that I did for our own website when I first joined, so that people could understand my background. And I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning her, but her name's Carol, and I met her through a support group. And she has been an absolute rock for me in terms of just having someone else that understood what I was going through. She was diagnosed with Graves' disease. She had other health complications as well, which I didn't, but we had a similar treatment pattern. And it was just feeling heard and understood by somebody in a way that even your close loved ones and families and friends couldn't relate to, because they hadn't had that lived experience.
Yeah,
Was just absolute gold for me. And I see it all the time in our events. And that's the bit where I just think this is why it's so important. This is where, you know, it steps in and fills those gaps in people's lives that can really make a massive, impactful difference.
yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the mission statement for the charity is something along the lines of "You're not alone." Is that right?
Yeah, that's the sort of strap/tagline, is that you're
Yeah.
not alone. Because the thing that we found with thyroid disease is that lots of people, because it's not an obvious illness in terms of, you know, you can't necessarily walk up to someone and know straight away that they're suffering with some sort of thyroid disorder. So we find that a lot of people feel quite isolated. And I think with anything chronic, even your loved ones, you know, stop asking how you are. And I know a lot of people feel awkward in terms of sort of saying, well, I still don't feel great, or because they feel like, oh, I've been talking about this for such a long time now.
Yeah.
And masking is something that comes up a lot in our peer support sessions, where people talk about the fact that they feel like in, you know, their social groups or their employment or educational settings, that they have to put on this mask of, I'm okay, I've got this, where actually what we tend to find is that that might not be the truth. They might not actually be feeling okay. They might still be suffering with fatigue. They might still be struggling with anxiety or feeling a bit depressed. And they just, they just want people to know you're not the only one. There's lots of us out here that are living that life and, still experiencing those challenges.
Yeah.
And there's a whole community here for you who can offer you that support, and just making people feeling heard is so important, and can just makes them feel validated. And I think we all need that just on a human level.
Yeah. So I get that a lot from patients I work with who sort of say, like, the best part of, I always speak to people afterwards and say what's been good for them about working with me and things like that. And what, and one of the things that always comes up is that just having somebody that I felt understood it and heard me. And because like you say, thyroid it's an invisible autoimmune. It's what we would class as invisible autoimmune disease. I don't have thyroid, I have MS, but it's again an invisible autoimmune. It's why I'm a bit like you. This is what I got into doing the work that I do, because of my health conditions, which is usually the case with most of the practitioners that I work with. We always usually have got our own health story there somewhere, but they are invisible. And that can be just the fact that they are those sort of invisible chronic illnesses, like you say, can be really isolating. And also, I think the comment I got a lot was, but you look so well. And it's like, oh, great. Like, thanks. Like, I'm really pleased I look well. But at the same time, it's almost kind of like they were almost saying it in a way that kind of diminishes it a bit in your head. You sort of think like, well, I should be well. I look well. I should be well. I should be feeling okay. I should have all the energy. And, when you're at that point where you're not very well, it's quite hard. It's quite hard to live with.
Yeah, we do support groups which are based around what we call literacy skills sessions, which sounds really complicated, but one of the things we try and do is help people find an outlet or way to verbalize. And Anthony, who's one of our volunteers, runs these brilliant sessions. And one of the words that stuck with me when I attended one of these was, so many people described having this chronic illness like a roller coaster. And I think that's the other thing as well. So whilst everybody obviously feels poorly at diagnosis, and then the hope is that with treatment, they'll then start to feel better. But we know that then other factors can impact that journey along the way. So there may be some sort of stress going on in people's lives that can cause things to re-trigger, or sometimes for some of them, people go into remission and then come back out again. And so it's that having people that will be there when through the good and the bad times. So because you don't need it, what we find is that people don't come to the charity all the time. They'll dip in and out as and when they need, for what they need, whether it be they might be feeling better on treatment, but actually they still want to know further information, or they might want to get involved in research, or all these sorts of things that obviously we can put them in contact with. So I just think it's that constant, that journey and that up and down, and that being there and having that not being alone. And it doesn't have to be just when you've diagnosed. It can be in 5-6 years time when you need something else. So it's that continuous support, I think.
Yeah, and that's the typical autoimmune journey, isn't it? Is that sort of, as well as we can get people, even putting people into remission. And obviously that, with the work I do, that's the goal, is to get people as close to remission, into remission as possible. We can't cure autoimmune diseases. And I'm very clear, people often, when I have an initial call with them and say, can you cure this? And it's like, I'm very clear with people, you can't cure an autoimmune disease. It's chronic. You're going to have it for life. It's about managing it well. But even people that you can get really well and back into remission, they will still at times have flare-ups. That's part of the autoimmune journey. And we have those times where you will, symptoms will flare up a bit. Like you said, stress is usually, there are other things, but stress is commonly, sometimes catching viruses and things like that is another sort of really common one as well. But stress tends to be the really big one, and it can cause flare-ups. And actually, I was talking to somebody the other day who had recently came to work with me and recently had a flare-up, and prior to that had been quite well. And she actually said that she was finding the flare-up now, which I think she's about almost 5 years down the line from diagnosis. And she said she's finding the flare-up actually has impacted her in a mental capacity. So sort of with anxiety and the depression, sort of she's quite down about it, more than the original diagnoses. Because when she was ill, she was like, well, I'll get treatment and I'll get better and it'll be okay. And she said she had quite a positive outlook. And then she said when the flare-up came back, she was like, oh, I've been well for so long. And actually the flare-up she found harder to deal with than the initial stage where she knew she was ill and she just wanted to get on with treatment and get on with dealing with things and sorting things out. And we've been talking a lot about that sort of mindset around it and things like that. And I think that having, like you said, having people around you at that time, having places to turn is really important. And it does hit people at different times. Some people, you know, I've spoken to different people about their journeys with diagnosis. And for me, getting a diagnosis was a relief because it had been such a long time of not knowing. For other people, they get the diagnosis and actually it's really, they don't take that well. It's really difficult for them to hear that they've got this, whatever the condition might be. And so people react differently and it hits people at different times. And to have somewhere to turn, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you say it, because one of the things that again comes up a lot in our peer support is about that sort of grief for your former self that we find, and that can hit people at different stages as well. So we find that some people come back when, you know, they may have lived a very active life before, or they may have done certain things that suddenly they find, and the reality is, oh, actually, I might not be able to quite do all of those things in the same way that I could. And I was trying to say to people from my own experience that it's that patience with yourself, and it's I try really hard to focus on the things that I can do, as opposed to things that I maybe can't do in quite the same way as I could before. I probably did too much in terms of, you know, being a busy working mum and everything else. You try and be superwoman and, you know, be everything to everyone, which I'm sure will be relatable to many. But the reality is that you can't always do that. And I think that's a massive frustration. It was for me, and I know it has been for other patients I've spoken to. And it's about, like I say, learning to accept it's going to be slightly different moving forward, but it doesn't mean that it has to be not as good. It just looks a bit different. And those things, like I say, they seem to hit people at different times. And they may come back and just want to talk about that and how, you know, that they feel about that. Or, you know, we like to also celebrate the positives where we can. And, you know, it's that thing of when you can suddenly do something like, I've just started running again for the first time in 3 years. And, you know, the first time I ran 5K, I was like, oh my goodness, so excited. It was such a celebration. And to other people that do that week in, week out, they're probably thinking, all right. But it was like, I didn't know that I'd ever be able to necessarily feel well enough to get to that stage without it being detrimental to me again. And so, you know, I've got to take it easy. I can't do that every day or anything ridiculous like that. But when I can do those things, it feels like a massive sense of achievement again. So
yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about there's that sort of, I guess, burnout of that, you know, that sort of, so I work on the autoimmune side and I work a lot on the preventative medicine side as well. So people who have burnt out, and there is such a link between the two, because I tend to find that a lot of the people who do get autoimmune diseases, a lot of them have been that sort of quite high achieving, fast-paced lifestyle, pushing through, you know, juggling lots of different things. And I think a lot of the time that in itself is a trigger for, you know, for an autoimmune condition. And actually, and a lot of people, it's really interesting to see that connection of actually they are that fast-paced lifestyle actually can have a really detrimental impact. And then when something like that hits, it's almost harder for them because they've been that person that is so used to being on the go all the time that it's kind of hard to then sort of have to deal with this that is impacting that life. But like you said, you can get back to, okay, it might be a slightly different version of normal, but you can get back to doing a lot of the things that you maybe can't do initially and have to sort of pull back on. And I mean, even a person who's just got burnout and not developed like a chronic illness, we need to pull back on like a lot of the exercise and things like that they're doing. They're probably overtraining and things like that. So even before you get to the point of having a chronic condition, you know, we have to pull back. But that doesn't mean that you can never get back to doing these things. Like you said, you know, running that 5K again and being like, not sure I was ever going to get here, and now you've done it. And there will be other goals that you get to hit along that journey. And it's nice to have them. It's also nice, I guess, to have a community around you that you can celebrate that with.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the big things that, in terms of what we do as a charity, we focus on peer support. We also big on advocacy in terms of giving people the skills and the knowledge, and informed knowledge, that they can have those conversations with their healthcare providers, and feel much more empowered in doing those. And also raising awareness is a massive part of what we do. But that peer support, like I say, has been the big thing. And we do lots of online and face-to-face and so people can share that lived experience as well, because we know that people will go to their healthcare professionals and get the medical advice. I mean, we do give people access in some of our talks. We will have endocrinologists and other healthcare professionals come and do talks for the community, so that people, especially at the moment with everything that's going on in the healthcare system, it does give people access, like I say, to informed information. So we know that it's coming from a credible source, and people aren't sort of, going on to the internet and finding out, because some people come to us for saying, oh, I found out this, or I've been doing this, and you just think, oh, okay, have you spoken to your doctor about that first, or whatever? And it's always a little bit of a worry at times. So we do give people access to that, but it's that lived experience. And we try and give it back the other way as a charity. So we give the endocrinologists access to patients. So on our talks, they'll have an opportunity to do a Q&A. And I think it's really important for both parties, so that they can hear firsthand what it's like for patients and the things they're experiencing in the same way. But it's the sharing of the gold, as I call it, with the peer support meetings. So you'll get people coming on and they'll be really worried because they've changed a job, or something along those lines, and someone else within the group will come up with something. And I've seen it happen so many times, and be like, well, I had that and I managed to get occupational health involved, and then I got all this support through my employer. And it's just that sharing of lived experience. It's just, it is so impactful and makes such a difference in people's lives that, and we encourage people to, come back and let us know how we're doing. And there are patients that, as a charity, we've been speaking to for the years that we've been active, and you're there, and you live it with them in terms of their highs and lows, and it's lovely. It is a real community, is the best way to describe it.
So if people come to you guys, they get, I know you've mentioned sort of the peer support groups, and you have some talks and things like that. What can people expect if they approach the charity? Because I know sometimes people are a bit anxious maybe about reaching out, not quite sure what's going to be involved, what's going to, how involved they're going to have to be, and all of that sort of thing that can sort of almost hold people back from reaching out to people like yourselves or practitioners, anybody really. What can people expect sort of when they reach out? What sort of things do you put on for them? What could they get involved in?
Yeah, so we've got lots of ways that people get in touch with us, and they do, whether it be through socials. I mean, lots of people send us emails in. I always say is that, first and foremost, if you're asking the questions, it's great. It's a great start, because like you say, even if they're lacking in confidence, at least they've come to somewhere where we're not medically trained. And I always make that really clear. We can't give people individual medical advice. And we do get people contacting us saying, oh, I'm a bit worried about this, I'm a bit worried about that. What do you think? And, we're always very honest about the fact that you do need to speak to your healthcare providers. But the things that we can do to help and support and we offer to people is, we can point them in the direction of the correct guidelines, so they know, like I say, so they can be informed as to have those conversations as to what they should be expecting in regards to their care. We don't just do it in regards to things like pointing them in the right direction of NICE guidelines and things like that. We might know of other patients that have had experience and put people in contact with each other. That happens. We do have one of our volunteers, Emma. She is a thyroid patient. She's also a qualified personal trainer. So people quite often come to us for support around how to get back into exercise and things like that. And again, we can put those questions to a trained professional and get them a response. Like I say, we offer in regards to the peer support, we do that in lots of different ways. So we host online events generally for each individual sort of disorder, if you like. So we have peer support for people with hypothyroidism or an underactive thyroid. We have peer support sessions for people that have an overactive thyroid or Graves' disease or Hashimoto's, going back to the hypothyroidism. And then we run peer support for patients that have been diagnosed with thyroid cancer. So it's quite individual. We've actually got a new one coming up that we've not done before in November. We're actually doing a men only support because we're very aware that it's a very female dominated space.
Yeah.
And we know that's because women are 10 times more likely to suffer with thyroid problems than men, but that's not to say that men aren't affected. Yeah. So we're doing a men only peer support so that they can also access support in a space that feels safe for them. So they can come along to these events. You can literally log on and just listen. You don't have to. We always say to people, don't feel that you have to start, telling your whole life story or contributing, because not everybody's in that place. So generally what happens is we have someone who hosts, and that will always be a volunteer in terms of someone that's just got lived experience of that particular condition. They will just talk a little bit about their experience, their journey, and then it's opened up to everybody that's attended to have a say. And we're very much a case of it's, an inclusive space and people can share or not share. Some people like to do it on the chat, which is why Zoom's really good because people don't have to have a camera on. They can just put their questions into the chat or they can, share their story that way. There's always, like I say, the host is always there. Generally, I'm online as well, just to kind of guide people and help them through it. So it doesn't have to be intimidating. Some people might come along and, like I say, just listen for the first one, and then maybe the next one they'll want to, and then maybe later down the line they'll actually be one of the people saying, well, I feel comfortable enough now to be talking about this, and I will share. We do face-to-face events in London where we literally just sit around and have a cup of tea, have some biscuits, and literally chat. And we always do a catch up in terms of people that have come regularly. How are you feeling now? What's happening to you? But there's always new people coming, and again, they can literally just sit there and have a cup of tea and talk to someone. It might just be like, where can I get information on this particular area? We've always got leaflets and things available to hand out to people. Sometimes they just want to come and meet another thyroid patient. I know for me, that was a real big thing because I think because I'd been so isolated, I hadn't actually met any other thyroid patients. And Karen, who's one of our trustees, who also has Graves' disease, she was one of the first people I actually met face-to-face who had the condition that I'd been diagnosed with. And it was just wonderful in the sense that there was someone else who knew what it was like to have this, and just seeing them. And she's lived with the condition longer than I have, and to hear her, the fact that she was out paddleboarding and all this sort of stuff, I was like, oh, this is wonderful. So like I say, it's up to them in terms of how much they want to get involved and how much they don't. They don't have to do, they can do as much or as little as they like, basically. And in regards to the talks that we run, we always let people know in advance what the talk is about. So, they can decide whether or not it's for them. And if they do turn up, they don't have to contribute. They can just listen to the presentation. But like I say, there is a Q&A session. So it does give people the opportunity to ask the professionals, what would you do in this circumstance? Or what's the latest on this, and all this. And it's those things, giving people access to that information is really great. The feedback we have after every event is brilliant. People are always, we're very open. I always say to people, if there's something we should be doing, if there's something that you feel we need, we're doing this December. We've got one of our supporters who is a yoga studio doing a meditation and gentle yoga session for us online in December, which I just thought would be lovely. That lead up to Christmas where everyone's sort of rushing around, just teaching people some stress management skills. We've done some charity partnerships with like the sleep charities so that people can get information and advice on a really good habit to get into to have a good night's sleep, because we know that that's something that our thyroid patients have come back to saying, I really struggle with my sleep. So it's like, right, well, how can we support these? So I always say to patients is, get in contact with us, let us know the things that are important to you, that are affecting you. And it's that whole holistic thing. It's not just about providing, listening ear, some medical information. It's about how else can we help and support thyroid patients so they can go and have a good quality of life. And like I say, that's giving them information on all the other things that we know affect them, from stress management. The literacy skills I mentioned, that's another one. Gives people the ability to start journaling, because we know that that's really good for mental well-being. We know that that really helps in terms of like tracking and logging people's symptoms. So again, when they're sat in front of their doctor, they can go, well, this is what I've been experiencing. And it's just trying to give them the support that they need. And we're very, very open to that feedback.
Yeah, I think it's really useful for people to know. And that's why I asked you the question, because I think like you said, with the sharing side of things, that some people maybe would, if they're not ready, if they feel maybe that they're not quite ready to share and things like that, it could almost hold them back from reaching out to these things. So I think for them to know actually they can just come and sit and listen and, things like that, I think is maybe for some people won't be worried. They'll want to talk and want to share, and that's great if they're ready for that. But for the ones that are not, to know that they can actually come along and just sit and listen to a presentation or sit and listen to other people talk, but they're getting good, genuine advice from a solid source, and it's coming from the right places. I think it's useful for people to know that actually it's all very laid back, and that you're all very friendly, and that they can just reach out and get get involved as much or as little as they want. I think helps people just to get started if they are feeling a little bit awkward about reaching out and talking about it, like you said, which I think can be the case for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. We do get involved in campaigning as well. So there are a couple of campaigns that we're working on that people can get involved with, again, in as little or as in no way as they want. One of them that you may be aware of is regarding the T3 campaign, which is access to lipoprotein, which is an alternative treatment to levothyroxine, which most people are put on if they have an underactive thyroid,
which we can't get, just so people sort of know, we at the moment can't get in the UK. So I work with people kind of all over the world. So I've got a mix of people who can get access and people who can't get access. And it's not easy. You can't really get access to it within the UK easily at all.
The guidelines are that it is to make it more accessible to people, in terms of that there should be trials offered if there's no other abilities, in terms of, they look at things like B12 and iron. And this is just for people that are still symptomatic when they've been on levothyroxine. And we have a proportion of our community that are patients that require or take T3, and we know the challenges that they've faced in regards to getting access to this. So we're working with all the other thyroid charities and patient groups to improve the guidance, the wording of the guidance, to make it accessible to those that really need it. And we know at the moment it's still a bit of a postcode lottery, and some people have been successful and some people haven't. So that's one of the campaigns which we're involved in. And one of the things we still actively ask people to do is, through our website, they can put information on there about whether or not they have been told that this is something that they need, and whether or not they have been able to get access. And, this is really useful information that we can collate and use and present to the powers that be to influence change, basically. And the other thing that we're trying to do is get thyroid conditions onto the women's health strategy, because, as we alluded to earlier, we know that women are 10 times more likely to have a thyroid problem than men. And so we feel that just on that basis alone, it's something that needs to be considered on there, so that it gives it a bigger platform, a bigger voice for thyroid patients, so that, they can be heard. And one of the things that the charity really wanted was to ensure that, people that are affected by thyroid disease are taken seriously, are treated well, are better understood, and, that they can get the support they need and feel empowered living with their condition. So we know that, by doing these sorts of campaigns, that hopefully it will have a positive impact for thyroid patients moving forward. So
and it's great that you that you all get together as well, the different, like you're saying, different patient advocacy groups and the different thyroid charities to all pull together, because that's really what we need with these when we're trying to get change for big things like this. It's not easy. It's never going to be an easy journey to make those kind of changes, but if all of those groups can pull together and really work on campaigns like that, like you're saying, that's how change gets made. And that's really important for then getting the right support to the patients, as it goes down the line. But to be able to pull together like that, I think it's really nice to work in that way.
Yeah, I think that's just testament really to, like I say, the thyroid community generally is that it's a very supportive, and everybody wants to know and like help each other. That's the thing. And I've been really impressed by how generous a community and supportive a community that it is. So yes, it's good to have that one voice to shout loudly and give the patients that are not well enough, because that's the problem, is quite often when people are really poorly is when they need the most help. And that's the time that you have the least amount of energy and I suppose resource to actually fight your corner. So it's listening to the voices of the patients and helping them where we can. So looking ahead, as we're rapidly approaching 2024, but what have you got sort of event wise? Do you know what's coming in 2024? Is that something that people can kind of go on your website and find out? Where can they get the information on the events, sort of more specifically? Where can they get that information of what's coming up? Yeah, so through our website, which is the thyroidtrust.org. So it's thyroidtrust.org. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter/X. I never know quite what. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't even know what it is anymore.
I still see X and I'm like, what's that? And I'm like, I'm still looking for the blue bird as well on my phone when I'm looking for the app. It confuses me.
And we're on Instagram. So we always promote all of those events on all of those platforms. We also have a mailing list that people can subscribe to on our website. And I would really strongly recommend, if people are interested we do a sort of quarterly mail out, which lets people just know about any news in the thyroid world, in terms of whether it be related to research or whether it be related to guidelines or anything like that. It updates people from that perspective. It also lets people know about all of our events, and we'll also celebrate any news within the community that we're aware of. So it's a nice, easy way. They're not massive long reads, but I would just recommend that anyone sign up for that if they're interested in getting sort of information, because it's a nice, easy format and it's not that regular. So we won't be spamming your inbox every 5 minutes.
And we'll link that below, actually, below the episode. We'll link your website. We'll put the link to sign up to the mailing list and to your socials as well, so that people can easily, if they're listening to this and think they want to do that, if they head to the show notes below the episode, we'll put all the links in there for them so that they can easily just click on those and connect with you guys.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you. But in regards to 2024, we've got 4 dates already for face-to-face meetings in London. They generally take place at the Crown Court Church, but that will all be on there. And like I say, they're normally a drop-in session between 10:30, 12:30. I think that might be changing for next year, so don't quote me on those specific timings. But we've got 4 dates, one in February, one in May, one in September, and one in December. We will also be doing a monthly peer support online session for our community. Now that will vary from month to month. So like I say, some months it will be for hypothyroidism related conditions, Hashimoto's, underactive thyroid, and some months it will be Graves' disease, overactive thyroid, and there will be months for thyroid cancer patients as well. So it will just be a case of, I don't quite know how that's going to play out yet. It will depend on quite heavily on what volunteers come forward to host those particular programs. So we'll be doing those. And then, yes, we hope to do some other, like I say, sort of interesting events. When I think about what we've done this year in terms of we've had a top oncologist talk. We'll always do we've had some really interesting talks on some of the research that's going on in the thyroid world, which I think is really important for patients, because it shows, I know that when I was first diagnosed, I was unaware of any of these things, of, all the work that's kind of, if you like, going on behind the scenes. And I think that gives people hope and shows that there is interest. At the moment, there's a big petition about raising more money for thyroid research. So there's a petition going around that we've shared multiple times, and I think all the other charities have as well, where people, and it's just how people can get involved and make an impact if they don't want to sort of, start volunteering regularly. But just, I always say to people, they always think, oh, but that's not going to do anything. And I think, no, seriously, if you could be that one signature that tips it over 10,000, that takes it to Parliament, it's that. So never underestimate, even if you think, just like, resharing stuff on socials about an event, you might make that then visible to somebody that would really, really benefit. But we've had talks from authors who have written various books around not just all things thyroid. It might be around, women's health, or, like I say, we'll do something holistic. We'll still continue our literacy skills, because we know that people really benefit from that, even though a lot of people are quite intimidated by the name of it. So I think I might have to rechange that. So, and then we also have a monthly column in an online health magazine, and sometimes people want to write things for that of their lived experience. So there's, like I said, there's lots of ways that people can get involved, but fundamentally it's about raising awareness of thyroid disorders and disease generally, so that we can give patients a bigger platform, a bigger reach, and offer more support to those people that really need it.
I love that. And Louise, thank you so much for joining me today. I think it's really helpful for people to find out about these resources that are out there, because people are not always aware that these things are available. And I think you've got so many good, you've just listed off a load of things there for 2024. There's so much that, you're obviously is going to be happening over the next year. And I think there's lots of really beneficial stuff that people are going to find really useful. So if people do have, well, I know people that listen to this podcast have thyroid conditions, because I think it's about 70% of my clinic now is thyroid. So there will be lots of people with thyroid listening to this, and like I said, we'll drop those links below so people can connect with you guys, and just make sure that they're getting really good solid advice and getting that support and the peer support as well, which I think is really important. But thank you for giving your time today as well to come on and chat about it.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having us. And I just say to anybody that's listening that's got it, there is no such thing as a stupid question. So don't ever be afraid to get in touch and ask us those things. And it is that remembering that they're not going to be alone. So if and when they're ready, there's a lovely supportive community waiting for them right here.
Lovely words to finish on. Louise, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Nicole.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Good Health Podcast. Do share the episode with anyone who you think it may benefit or who may enjoy it, and help me spread the word by rating the episode or leaving a review. If you want more, you can find other episodes in the series on your podcast app, or sign up to my free newsletter. Not only will you get information on new episodes launching, but we cover lots of health topics, with the Ask Nicole section where you can send in your questions, my favourite recipes, my favourite products, tips and tricks to help you on the road to good health, and much more. You can sign up free of charge at nicolegoodhealth.com/newsletter, also linked below. I hope you have a lovely week. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.